Welcome to Climate Channel. Climate is changing and it is changing very fast. To face this manage, we have been from Climate Channel organizing climate conversations, climate action pathways. This is our 7th episode, and today we will discuss on loss and damage, climate-induced loss and damage. Because of climatic changes, temperature rise, frequent floods, droughts, inundation, soil degradation is happening everywhere across the globe. How best we can resolve this problem, face adverse runaway impacts of climatic changes is a Herculean task. But we know that we have United Nations Framework Convention drafted in 1991-92 and United Nations Framework Convention Secretariat was established and Conference of Parties started its journey since 1995 and Martin Co. But loss and damage was not in the picture. Though the developing country parties tried to flag it, but it was not in the process. But all said and done, it figured in the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage was established in 2013. And from then on, it has been in the negotiation. But for last couple of COPs, we couldn't reach any agreement because of some tricky issues. Some hard nerves are yet to be resolved. And in COP26, we are supposed to have a fact agenda, especially on loss and damage. And what would be the, say, modus operandi of international Warsaw mechanism for loss and damage? Will it be under the Conference of the Parties, or will it also be under the Paris Agreement? If it is in within Paris Agreement, then we will have a number of issues which has to be resolved, especially compensation, issue of compensation. And with that note, we are now heading towards Conference of the Parties, COP26 in Glasgow, come November. But we are yet to have any preparatory meetings, especially 3 SBs and SABSTA meetings we couldn't have since last year. So the negotiators have to face a lot of Herculean tasks, and countries are facing, especially the most vulnerable countries are facing more frequent floods, inundation, tropical cyclones, and desertification. So how best we can face it. We have a strong panel today. Matti Nummelin from Finland, who has been in this process for many years. Manjeet Dhakal from Nepal, who has also been in the process for quite some time, especially with the least developed country group as a lead negotiator. We have with us Hafijul from Bangladesh, who has also been in loss and damage negotiation for quite some time. Dr. Sharmind Neelormi from Jahangirnagar University, who has also been in the Conference of the Parties as an expert, and Sarah Millar from United Kingdom. So without much ado, I would now like to request Manjeet Dhakal to kick off the conversation. Manjeet.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Quamrul. And it's good to see many familiar faces in this discussion. When we talk about the loss and damage, it's a bit technical. The phrase loss and damage itself refers to different thing in different discussion. It may sound technical for many other people who don't follow the climate change negotiation. Let me start the discussion with trying to explain the context. When we talk about the loss and damage in the climate change process, in the climate change negotiation process, we refer to something that when the climate change impacts that exceeds the adaptation capacity. And the term itself is defined as loss. It's something that refers to things that are lost forever and cannot be brought back, cannot be restored. For example, human life when they are lost. And damage refer to something which can be repaired or they can be restored to the pre-existing situation. Some of the example, like when there is a flood and there is a when the embankment are washed away, efforts are required. Intervention has to be done, but that can be restored. So when we are linking this with the climate change context, the context in front of us is the emissions are continuously rising, even though there is a strong effort from everyone and through the UN process. But emissions are still rising, and the way the continue climate change, the greenhouse gas rise, simultaneously the temperature of the earth has risen. So as of now, roughly around in 100 years, 1 degree of average temperature has already risen, which has linked to a number of disasters around the world. That has changed the rainfall pattern, that has changed the ecosystem itself. So the discussion now is it possible to adapt with all these changes or not? So the discourse about loss and damage is about there is a limit to adaptation. There is a limit that we can do. So let's also discuss about things that we cannot adapt. Let's also discuss about the permanent losses that cannot be restored. So that's what the context that we are in. We have experts colleagues who have involved in the UN negotiation process in UNFCCC, so I will not go detail on that. But this issue is one of the key pillars in climate change negotiation, and is one of the important points that the vulnerable countries has been raising. Thank you, Quamrul. I'll come back later with more points.
Then I would now like to request Matti, you take. We know what is loss, what is damage, and how to say restore it, retrofit it, and how to have it in an international mechanism like Warsaw International Mechanism, whether we have national mechanism, how to trickle down, how to face it. Matti.
Thanks, Quamrul, and thanks, Manjeet, explaining that some basics what we speak about when we are speaking about loss and damage. And I think that when the time is going since Warsaw, when we first established Warsaw International Mechanism, I think that there has been several such occasions that people realize that everywhere in the world that there are such a loss and damage that which cannot be replaced. And especially I can refer to human losses. That is something that there is no way to replace them, and that's why I think that it's also more and more in public knowledge that something has to be done. And I remember when I was helping to trying to put together the first initial work plan for the Warsaw International Mechanism for this loss and damage, there was a lot of discussion about how to approach this. But I think that there has been a very good progress so far. So there are different kind of, if I look, because I changed that there are, for example, clearinghouse for risk transfer, which is important, I feel. And then there is this Fitch clearinghouse, and then there is also what I think extremely important. There is a task force for displacement, and I think that this displacement is such that it also takes a lot of attention in such countries that which are not directly affected by loss and damage, but those countries realize that in some parts of the world, people are forced to be displaced and to go somewhere else. And I think that it's a wake-up call. And I think that puts the stage from my side now. And I will return later, for example, that what is my country, Finland, trying to do in this issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Matti. Dr. Sharmind Neelormi, say you are an academician. What is your take? What do you think of loss and damage, economic and non-economic losses? How to calculate it? How to say cover it? How to stop? How to transfer the risk? How to say what is the economic say implications, non-economic implications, societal implications? Dr. Sharmind. Sharmind.
I need to unmute. Thank you, Quamrul. Thanks. Actually, while it's hard to pin a dollar value on damages, already discussed, economic models suggest climate change already costs hundreds of billions in damages globally during the 20th century through lost crops, rising seas, and more extreme weathers in terms of frequency, in terms of intensity. And as our earlier speaker rightly mentioned, that there is no way we can value the lives we actually lost. The societal and financial costs of climate impacts that can no longer be avoided tend to be grouped under the catch-all term, loss and damage. We all know that in 1991, even as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, was being drafted, the Alliance of Small State Islands, LDCs, a negotiating group of nations facing most of the worst climate change risks, highlighted the need to address loss and damage for vulnerable countries. The group proposed establishing an international insurance pool that could, for example, compensate victims of projected sea level rise. Let me remind you that in 1991, while we started discussing and negotiating, there was hardly any instrument to measure the scale of devastation or damages due to climate change or climate variability. In most of the developing countries, the data, time series data for 30 years, that those were not present. So scientifically, the connection between climate change and its effect on economic sectors and lives and livelihoods, that those were not actually scientifically proven. Since then, the negotiation table advanced the issues technically, so to say, on scientific ground, but it took another 16 years almost for loss and damage to be included in a formally negotiated UN text, a part of enhancing adaptation action, the 2007 Bali Action Plan, which called for a text on loss and damage. Now, actually, there are 4 approaches where the discussion is going on: slow onset events, non-economic losses, displacement related to adverse impacts of climate change, and comprehensive risk management transformational approach. Quamrul, I have been involved in women and gender constituency since long, before its inception actually. And it was quite a challenge to, plate it on the negotiation table, the slow onset events and its impacts, and how to measure it. The displacement, we have been talking about optimistic migration, the opportunistic migration, but in climate change, the LDC group and the civil society groups, we tend to advocate for the forced displacement, which needed to be addressed in the negotiation text. And now it has come to come to a shape. The displacement-related task force has come up with reports, a mapping where national policies address several displacement issues related to climate change, where are the gaps, and how we can move on, with those gaps. So now we have a mapping on those national policies on displacements related to climate change. And non-economic losses, which were very important for women. These, measurement and scaling are going on. Experts are working on those. Yeah, something is going on. I will definitely focus more on the economic instruments, in the term, if I have the opportunity.
Okay.
Later on.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sharmind. Now I would like to request Hafiz. Before when we are going Bali in 2007, as pointed out by Sharmind, Bangladesh faced Hurricane Aila, which devastated our southern coast. The Sundarbans was quite a rock solid and protected Bangladesh from even more devastation, but it cost several hundred people's life, and also several million dollars were lost. But some of the loss couldn't be covered even today after 14 years, 15 years almost, even Hurricane Sidor, subsequent Hurricane Sidor, Amphan, the losses, the damages are yet to be hoped by the devastated people, by the Maroon people, by the affected people. Some of them have lost their livelihoods for, say, decades. So, how an international mechanism can help rescue these people, not only in Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Fiji, Samoa, Marshall Island, even in the developed countries. Hafiz.
Thank you, Quamrul Chowdhury. To be honest, I didn't hear you clearly. Colleagues, do you hear me clearly?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay.
We hear
you.
you.
Okay. Actually, I was hearing the previous speakers very carefully. I liked it because some of you tried to define the loss and damage. But you know, the challenge to define the loss and damage is multi-sectoral. But at this stage, that's why global community, we are not engaged to define the loss and damage. Instead, we are trying to understand the nature. It's very, very crucial. If we can understand the nature of the loss and damage, then we can identify the right approaches to deal with those sort of loss and damages. What Manjeet said, particularly permanent loss and damage, permanent loss and damage need to be addressed with usually with the compensation approach. But this is the sensitivity at the international policy debates and diplomacy. But current reality is that we accepted the voluntary and cooperative approach under the Warsaw International Mechanism, even under the Paris Agreement. That's why we are now, particularly LDCs and C-suite negotiators are really seriously involved in the negotiation process, how to structure this Warsaw International Mechanism as an effective mechanism so that it can deliver its functions to meet the needs of vulnerable communities, ecosystems to address the loss and damage. So we all know that outcomes from Madrid, Warsaw International Mechanism was reviewed and it suggested further structure, particularly to establish an implementation arm that is Santiago Network for Loss and Damage. Now we are really concerned because due to this pandemic, all stuffs are really stuck. So we are not moving forward quickly to structure this Santiago Network for loss and damage, because we are considering as an implementation arm of the Warsaw International Mechanism. So COP26 is very crucial to decide particularly the modalities and to structure this network and what would be the functions. Secondly, the
governance of the governance side of the international
governance
mechanism.
of this network. Second important issue, what Quamrul Chowdhury said, that governance issue. We are discussing now under we LDCs and G77 China. We do see Warsaw International Mechanism must be governed sharedly by UNFCCC and also Paris Agreement, because this mechanism was established under the UNFCCC. Now, only Paris Agreement cannot regulate this mechanism. So simple case, we would like to see the shared governance. But on the other hand, developed countries, they would like to see standalone governance, particularly that comes from Paris Agreement. That would be a big controversial issue at the COP26, and it is mandated to decide at COP26. Finally, finance, we need to address loss and damage with adequate activities at the ground level. So we need money. But at this moment, the financial mechanism at the UNFCCC is not ready.
We will come to the finance side later on.
So these are the crucial issues for COP26. Let me stop here and I will come back again. Thank you.
So Sarah Millar, what is your take?
Thank you. And it's so fascinating to hear all of your amazing expertise and experiences going back through Paris and Copenhagen and Bali and even earlier in some cases. Clearly this is not a new issue, and yet it feels like it is a new issue, just because of all of the conversations seem to be a little bit Groundhog Day. You know, these are not new discussions, and yet it's slightly frustrating in that we all feel like we're coming to them new. When you have negotiators like yourselves and experts like yourselves who have been around for such a long time, it must be doubly frustrating, particularly with perhaps some of the developed countries, and I would count the UK, and I would sort of describe my own country in this group, that you feel like you're having to remake the case each time, and that must be infuriating. I think from the UK side, and certainly from the COP presidency side, I think up until now it's felt like there's been a major focus on mitigation for COP26, and the other side of the conversation seems to have been not raised to the top of the agenda very much. My understanding is that that is beginning to change, and I would be fascinated to hear your views and reflections on the Climate and Development Ministerial that took place last week. I understand leaders from Bangladesh and ministerial attendance happened in that instance, and how that has gone down. My impression is that the chair's summary is a step in the right direction. There are, you know, the beginnings of conversations, particularly around loss and damage, but around sort of broader climate development, and then if you stack on COVID onto that as well, and COVID recovery, there are some beginnings of some helpful moves forward. But we're 7 months away from COP26, and as Quamrul quite rightly said, there hasn't been any negotiation time. There's been very little opportunity, informally or formally, for the groupings either to have discussions amongst themselves in the first instance, and then almost no time at all to have discussions amongst groupings. So great that the UK has finally decided that it was worthy of a ministerial level conversation, but 7 months out from the COP, there is clearly so much more to be done, and it won't all get solved. Certainly not in 7 months, as the fact that you've all had careers out of this for 30 years and longer. So I'd be fascinated to get your reflections on the Climate and Development Ministerial, and as we get into the conversation as to what the priorities look like for COP26 and the finance conversation in particular. So thank you for already raising that, Hafij, but I get the impression that Quamrul wants to come to that on a separate item. So.
You see, Climate and Development Ministerial, it was a very small group of ministers and civil society people. It's like a token one. It's not a full-fledged negotiation. So for this small setting will not foster the negotiation, but it can't be the main instrument, because in negotiation what we have seen that it should be full-scale negotiation. Say 196 countries, everybody should participate. Every country should participate. Then they have to consult in their groups. Say Asian group, African group, Latin American group, AOCs, small island developing states, least developed country groups, African groups, ILA, then G77 and China, then also environmental integrity group and EU and other groups. They should negotiate within themselves. They should have a common position, then they should negotiate. So that way we are yet to negotiate in last 2 years, almost 2 years. We are not negotiating. So we have to pick that up first. As a negotiator, I know without that we can't make any progress. we don't have a magic lamp of Aladdin's to solve it. But we need to have a strong political will. For that political will, we need the co-presidency should gear up. And also Biden administration, they have come back to Paris Agreement. They should also try to come up in a big way. Otherwise, without that strong political will, France issues like loss and damage, especially long-term vision, which was tapered in Madrid. We couldn't reach an agreement on long-term vision of loss and damage. And also we couldn't make any progress, especially in terms of Warsaw International Mechanism, its governance, its, say, its work plan, substantive work plan are yet to be decided. So those are trans issues. These issues, and also then a finance issue, financing loss and damage. How to say, if we don't say compensation, but how to reward that, how to cover that, how to say help support that most vulnerable countries. That is a crucial issue. So Manjeet, what is your take, especially long-term vision, and also you can touch finance. Manjeet.
Thank you, Quamrul, and then thanks. I think this is really a helpful discussion. So I think specific on finance, I see this on 3 levels when we talk about the finance for loss and damage. The finance that is required to help understanding this issue, to help explore more about this, and in this first point, we are not talking about the huge money. We are not talking about the big funding. It's more to help developing countries prepare their plan, to help country, the scientific community, to have more discussion in terms of attribution of the climate change context, and develop understanding so that it helps countries to prepare plan and engage in this discussion. The second level of finance is about what all is already available, because there is still an opportunity for country if they want to apply for a proposal on the GCF, even though this is not clearly defined. There are opportunities when through the bilateral project or other multilateral project. There may be when we fill damage, but keeping it vaguely, the countries are funding this activity. That's the second. The third one, I think the key and which still need to be explored is the funding required to implement loss and damage activities, which is still to be explored, which we don't know the exact amount, which is also difficult to define, as colleagues said earlier, some of the non-economic losses and others, and that amount can go to trillion and more. So I think these are the 3 levels of funding requirement that we are. So the funding required for exact loss and damage is huge. Still need to be worked. But also to reflect on the previous point, when we talk about the loss and damage, it is not only that we are preparing for that situation. The first and the foremost point is the countries with the higher emission has to reduce their emission. If we are not able to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degree, the losses, the adaptation capacity, we will go beyond the adaptation limit, and the losses and the damages will be much higher. So I think the key here is to, for those countries with a higher emission, major emitters to reduce their emission. That remains key. If I just have to share an example of my country, our context, if the global temperature is limited to 1.5 degree, the Himalayan range temperature will go beyond 2.1 degree. Even if we are able to limit the temperature to 1.5 degree, 1/3 of the glaciers in the Himalaya region would melt. That means they will disappear. So that means the actions that we have in front of now, the actions that countries are taking is not enough. So I think the first thing is for the countries to take action. The second thing, for the vulnerable countries who are facing this situation, we cannot wait for the whole institution to be developed. For example, when there is as Quamrul Bhai, as you took an example about Bangladesh and similar flood and landslide, when we have such disaster, we cannot wait for this whole system to come and respond to us. There need to be a system that can quickly respond to those circumstances. So why I'm saying all this is the traditional practice that we have in the UN process or in the multilateral process or in the bilateral process of applying for a proposal, waiting for the funding to come, and going through all that process, that will not help to address this issue. So we need to think out of the box. How can we address a loss and damage, and how can we finance those communities that are facing this situation? Thank you.
Thank you. Matti, you are in the LDC expert group for many years. You have been in the negotiation since the inception. We know each other for many months. You have sympathy for the. We have seen in Madrid all the agenda items, especially finance agenda items, couldn't fly because of say financing loss and damage, financing adaptation. Because say if we don't adapt, then we are going to incur more losses and more damages. Because we are going beyond adaptation. And beyond adaptation means loss and damage. We are entering into loss and damage. So how to keep adaptation, say if we do more adaptation, we need to less loss and damage. We are going to incur less loss and damage. But if we don't adapt, then we need to go for more loss and damage. But adaptation has also limit. So what is beyond adaptation? How to say have a strong vision for that, a robust mechanism. Say international, what's the international mechanism? You are in the initial years. So you know, for crafting that was also a very tricky issue. But we succeeded to some extent, but not full extent. So how to make that full extent? Matti. Matti.
Yes, thanks, Quamrul. Yes, you have good, tough questions, and well, first I think that I have to repeat what Manjeet said in the beginning, that mitigation is the best way to prevent loss and damage in future. But still, I understand very well your concern about the finance, and as far as I understand, in this Fiji wait a minute, what is the formal name of it? It's in any case, what is it, the clearinghouse system established by WIM. They have already there some insurance information where also Sharmind referred to, and I know that there are such emergency funds, at least pilots, where the quick release of funds is possible, and I think that the quick release is one of the important issues, which also includes for the social security issues, which are important for those people who have been suffering the loss of damage of their properties. And I'm not insurance specialist, but I'm aware that there are promising pilots already going, and I hope that those pilots will expand, and I think that it's important that the Warsaw International Mechanism will support and give its support for these pilots, and also convince the financial mechanism to support these. And I think that there has already been, as far as I know, some discussions on this. And then a small final point from my countryside is that part of the preventing the loss and damage is the early warning systems, and there our meteorological institute has done a lot of work with small island developing states and also last developed countries, and it's a peer-to-peer collaboration, and also providing equipment and learning to predict these extreme events beforehand, to be that people could be prepared. I know that for example in Bangladesh there has been a huge progress on that there are systems that people are not unprepared when, for example, flooding events are coming. I know that it will cause loss and damage, but still, if they are not prepared, it will cause more. So that's from my side now, and we don't have too much time, so let's go further.
Thank you, Matti. Sharmind, Dr. Sharmind.
Thanks. First, we need to make ourselves remind that there are a range of issues that are covered under loss and damage: pre-disaster preparedness, risk reduction, emergency response, and post-disaster rehab. All actually are under loss and damage dialogues. And the clearinghouse the previous speaker was mentioning was launched at COP23 and is named the Fiji Clearinghouse for Risk Transfer. It catalyzes action and support by non-state actors, especially from the insurance industry. In Madrid, you are referring to Madrid COP. The Green Climate Fund, we knew that the countries can apply to the Green Climate Fund for finance to put in place early warning systems, weather insurance or infrastructure, resilience, for example, funding for embankments and other sources. So these are the options already existing, and in the name of adaptation, not in the name of loss and damage, financing are, on a roll. Also, there are multi-country programs like Insure Resilience Global Program, Catastrophe Risk Insurance, Comprehensive Risk Management Capacity with risk pooling and transfer like African Risk Capacity, Caribbean Risk Insurance Program. There are contingency finances for both at national and international levels. Climate-themed bonds and their certifications are launched. And the last, but the most important is the country parties, they are spending on social protection. And that sort of social protection, that covers a range of climate, climate victims and climate adversities. So there are real opportunities and real practices where loss and damages are financing of loss and damages are going on. The finer details are also within the COP discussions, and we are not sure where we are ending up to, where we are heading up. But so far, the financing is rolling out, that's quite a notable thing to discuss.
Yes, true. There are some lessons, there are some practices, there are some programs, but those need to be scaled up. Those need to be made robust. So I now go to Hafiz. He was initially tempted to explore the finance issues, because in Madrid there were in every agenda item, especially finance agenda items, every time developing countries try to push for support for loss and damage, especially for Green Climate Fund, for GCA, for Special Climate Fund, Least Developed Country Fund, Adaptation Fund. So these KITs should try to say COF should ask these bodies to support loss and damage in a robust way. Hafiz, what is your take?
Thank you, Quamrul Chowdhury, again, because again, thanks previous speakers to highlighted some of the critical issues like innovative financing. Some of you said, some of you also identify some of the really important approaches like insurance, early warning system, or weather index system, or disaster preparedness. All these are the approaches. Now, the key concern is, once we can identify some of the approaches, then we need to think about financing. So some of my colleagues, you already said about the financial entities. Finance, me as a governance student, I do understand. First of all, we need to understand the financial entities. What Quamrul Chowdhury already said, there are different financial entities already established under UNFCCC. Now, question is, who's particularly which financial entities? Is this the Green Climate Fund, or is this the JF? Is this the Least Developing Countries Fund? Or who will financing for the loss and damage, and how? We know that there is a specific co-decision for Green Climate Fund to finance 50% for mitigation and 50% for adaptation. It's a clear co-decision. So now, where is the pace for loss and damage? That's the big political and technical question. Then, in terms of mechanisms, okay, if we can think a special window under Green Climate Fund, but how you would like to facilitate this finance to the vulnerable communities? What would be the mechanism from international to local level to disburse this financing, to access this financing, and what would be the reporting, monitoring, and verification processes? So what are the transparency issues? Thirdly, I would like to highlight, we are now, we are thinking about innovative financing. What Professor Neelormi already said, some of the innovative financial mechanisms. But challenge is how, for example, you have passenger levy, right? That's a good idea. But how to institutionalize this idea within the UNFCCC in collaboration with some other trade mechanisms? That's the challenge. So what Manjeet said, we need to respond immediately to an incident and what causing the loss and damage. So we need immediate financing mechanism. So we need finance immediately. So we need to explore financial entities immediately. Later we can think about the innovative financial mechanisms. Now we know that Warsaw International Mechanism established the particular action group on finance, action and support. I'm pretty sure this action group would explore further ways how to develop these financial mechanisms and how to use existing financial entities, and also how we can utilize the innovative financial mechanisms. That is the big task. So we are very much looking forward COP26 to come up with clear COP directions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Miller. You know that before Copenhagen, we had a lot of, say, parlays, lot of negotiations. Negotiating time was more than, say, 20 weeks. We had negotiation time. But this time, for last 2 years, we didn't have any negotiating time. So going to the Glasgow COP in November, how to speed up things, because we know that in 2019 in Madrid, most of the agenda items were deferred to Glasgow, hoping that last year in November it can be thrashed out, it can be resolved, but it was not because of COVID. This year also we are yet to kick off any negotiation. SVs, meeting of the SVs are yet to be decided whether it will be happening in June or not. Then also October there is a slot, but we don't know what will be the fate. But before Copenhagen, you know that we have lot of discussions, even lot of parlays. Even in the time, British Prime Minister, he also had informal consultations with people like us. And that way, say he had discussion with President Obama at that point of time, and had $100 billion notion, ballpark figure, agreed much before Copenhagen. Okay, because at that time we are used to ask for trillions of dollars for climate finance, because I still remember in Conference of the Parties, I used to say that for adaptation we need $2 trillion, for mitigation $3 trillion, for capacity building $1 trillion, and also for technology transfer $2 trillion. So that were our asking from the developing countries. But we couldn't have that mechanism, international mechanism, robust mechanism. But we had at least Green Climate Fund. $100 billion were supposed to be pumped in from 2020. 2020 gone. We are now in 2021 in the month of April. But we could mobilize even $100 billion per annum. But it should be increased every year. So this time, whether we can have, say, a couple of $1 trillion for this decade, be promised by UK and USA, that is the political will we require to cut back emission, to raise the ambitions, especially NDCs. So updating the NDCs, raising the ambition, mitigation ambition, raising the adaptation ambition, and also loss and damage. Sarah.
Thank you, Quamrul. This is the problem with deferring things in the negotiations, because you never know quite what's around the corner. And if the last 2 years have taught us anything, is that even if things are difficult and complicated, we shouldn't be looking to defer the difficult issues and push them into the long grass, because I think we're running out of time. You know, if I think about when I was working in the UK government just after Copenhagen, we spent 6 years rebuilding the team and rebuilding everybody's morale and the confidence and the trust building, and that required so much effort, and like you say, so much contact time, formally, informally, and we are at an incredibly low ebb internationally, I think, in terms of confidence in each other, trust building, multilateralism.
Trust building is very important.
And it's been incredibly difficult to do that over Zoom. You know, even with the best will in the world, even with the good relationships that I can see that you all have, you know, I can tell that you've worked together, you've been in negotiations together over the years, but it's incredibly difficult to replicate the circumstances and the conditions of contact time, physical contact time. And it's almost impossible to replicate that. And when you're starting at such a low starting point anyway, as we are, thinking about sort of all of those issues that we put off from Madrid, even if we'd have had 20 hours of formal contact time, if we'd have had, you know, lots and lots of, you know, hours and weeks of informal discussions, I'm still not certain we would have been in the best place going into Glasgow anyway, and everything has made it so much more difficult. I get the impression as well that at the moment the UK at the highest levels are not engaged in the process as much as they ought to be. It's starting to happen, and there's certainly a lot of pressure from civil society organisations in the UK to try and focus the Prime Minister's attention on this, but we are certainly not in a position. So you were describing, I think, Prime Minister Brown pre-Copenhagen, who put an awful lot of personal effort into building relationships, thinking about what the finance offer would look like, and I don't think we have those sorts of individuals at the moment. I was moderately encouraged by hearing from Dominic Raab, the UK Foreign Secretary. So he was quite well involved with the Climate and Development Ministerial last week. His department obviously now holds all of the finances, so all of the UK's international climate finance effort is now being channeled through his department. I'm sure you're well aware of the challenges of having closed DFID for the UK and the implications and the message that has sent, which again maybe hasn't helped matters, hasn't helped with the trust building and the confidence. But I think the fact that Dominic Raab is now sort of breaking cover and talking about climate, talking about the importance of COP, at least it's a glimmer of hope that they are taking it seriously now. But whether 7 months out that's enough seriousness, I would probably imagine not at this point. Thinking about what you said about the 100 billion, the fact that we haven't been able to point to a single data source to say yes, we have absolutely met the 100 billion is incredibly problematic, because as you say, we haven't just missed 2020, we've missed 2021, and now it's April 2021. And this problem of continually making promises but breaking them is not helpful. So I think the LDC chair, he has a hashtag that he uses, no more broken promises, and I think this is very much the message that we need to be going into COP26. And I think it's really important to have that kind of jeopardy, not just around the finance but the negotiations themselves, because I think the UK is probably more sensitive to being seen not to have presided over a successful COP. So I think this idea of keeping promises, being a reliable international broker, being an honest partner is incredibly sensitive for the UK. So I think in all of the work that you are doing, the way that you are framing the conversations around the finance, around loss and damage, around adaptation, you should think about the prism through which it's seen. I think, Manjeet, you're still there. I was fascinated by what you were saying about the sort of there is sort of 3 steps of finance, and at the moment it seems to me like the UK is kind of focused on the preparedness aspect of it, So certainly coming out of the Climate Development Ministerial, there was a lot of discussion about how quickly the operationalisation of the Santiago network needs to be rolled out. And certainly it looks like the technical assistance aspect of it is one thing, but to me that's only one small part, and I'm still not convinced that the UK is looking holistically at all of the different aspects of loss and damage finance. Looking at the technical assistance side probably seems to be just one small aspect, and probably a thing that they can point to show that they're looking at LND, but I'm guessing how that might be perceived is that they're not taking the issue as systemically as they ought to. But I would love to get your reflections on that. I noticed that none of you had mentioned the Santiago network, which probably tells me everything I need to know about that. But
No. We are going to have a number of conversations like this on loss and damage ahead of Glasgow COP. So don't worry, we will come back again. But it was a great pleasure to have this conversation with all you. You take is of paramount importance to say ramp up the momentum for a good successful COP in Glasgow, and also to have an robust international mechanism for loss and damage, and also national mechanisms we do need urgently, because without national mechanism and also a robust international mechanism, loss and damage can't be halted. So to stop it, we need to go miles. For that longest miles, we need to engage such conversation in the days ahead. Hope to have you again in some other conversation on loss and damage and other issues of climate change. Climate change is important and it is right here. We have to face it. We have to address it. We have to approach it. With that, I would like to stop here because we are running out of time. Thank you very, very much. It was a great pleasure to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.